Hey guys, still doing a lot of practice to see what works for Magic and PvP, either Omega War and Dimension Duel, but I think I have a good idea of what's going to work for her for PvE game modes. Let's get into it. What's going on, guys? Kigerr here, and I think I have a good grasp on what's working for Magic in the PvE game modes. As you can see, I'm about to hit 106 on her. I have her at about 1.1 mil, so she's not weak. She's performing for me. But I've also worked with some other people. This isn't just my information. This is a collective of other content creators, other big name players. Just getting all the information and sifting through it. Also did damage numbers. If you're familiar with Half Send, another Marvel Future Revolution streamer player, what have you. I did not collude with him for this, but if you're familiar with his damage lab, I did the same kind of process to figure out what these numbers look like and what's actually happening in game. As you've probably noticed, some skills will say one thing, maybe a damage number, but when you look at it, it's really over the course of the multiple hits they do that damage. Now let's jump into the abilities. First, I like to start with the Dragon, the Imp summons. It says 61% of Magic's attack. That is across the board. As you can see in the animation, all 4 hit. So they do roughly, 12-13% each. But as you'll see later, we have ways to boost that. This is also a Legion of Demon skill. So as you level it up from the outfits, they will each do percentage more damage. This is the most damage per second for her summons. The dogs, which is the second one, is more guard break, and the demon general is more defensive. One of the best things you'll notice about Magic is she kind of has several different game plans with her abilities, which I'll go into in other videos. But right here, I'm going over the PvE setup. Next is one of my favorite abilities on her entire kit, and that is Master of Abyss, Abyssal Advent. She blinks forward, so it's a gap closer, and then she does a big AoE. It does about, as you see with my current setup, 550% damage, as well as a dot. The dot is going to do 13.3% of my attack per second for 5 seconds. You don't need a lot of status accuracy. I have 10 to 15% from just random things going on. I have not focused on it at all, and I have yet to miss a dot from this kind of ability. As you'll see, we don't really have a lot going on in this build. We focused more on pure raw damage, crit damage, what have you. Next, we go on to the Demon Hand. Now, summon Demon Hand. The Demon Ripper. This was a close one between all 3, the second, third, and fourth versions. This one won out because of the huge AoE, the distance it goes back, as well as the damage per second. What I mean by damage per second is this does the 518% damage, divided that by the 17.3 second cooldown, and the damage per second after that calculation is higher than the other abilities. Next is one of the coolest looking abilities probably in the game, Stepping Sword, Stepping Finisher. She sets up multiple swords around the target, disappears, reappears in the middle, and then does a drop down. It really ends up being 4 different hits visually, but as it plays, the swords do about 80% of the damage, and you dropping down does another 20% of the overall damage. As you can see, 642% damage. It has a knockdown, which will work on little mobs and things like that, but it won't work on Kingtron, things like that. Next is the Summon Dragon. This was actually super close by just a little bit. To give you an idea of the damage over time equation I did, so I looked at this ability right here, which ended up being a lot less actually, versus the Double Head Dragon. And the Double Head Dragon was pretty close. Double Head Dragon was about 44 damage per second, 44% damage per second, whereas the Dragons is 60% damage per second, which, percentage-wise is a lot more. I also put it last on the gear wheel. I would recommend this gear wheel skill lineup because the imps and then your 3 like mid-tier cooldown abilities, and it's set up in such a way you should be able to be rolling them into each other. And I worried about cooldown, but I didn't go too heavy. We'll go into the cooldown later on, but it's good to talk about the ultimate. Remember the ultimate, when you're in your ultimate, your auto attacks deal more damage. It's looking like anywhere. It takes a lot of practice to find out the exact numbers on things like this because of crit, max damage rate, things like that. But it's looking like anywhere from 200%, 250% extra damage on your auto attacks and 400% extra damage on your auto attacks. Now, you are taking a net negative once your 3 skills are on cooldown, doing your auto attacks in Dark Child versus doing your other abilities. So I recommend, you'll see the gauge, you can do it half gauge or full gauge. I recommend doing half gauge, so you're kind of going between Dark Child over and over. Next, we're going to talk about specialization. Now, with my current chart right here, I'm working towards PvP. I will be going across the board towards the PvE shortly. But going into the PvE from recommendations I get from other players, looking at their logs, checking the numbers, really going in depth with these things, is convert 3, this is 0.3, but goes up to 3% of HP to attack. This is your stat. This is not damage, this is the stat. This isn't the greatest for PvP. There's other things we need those slots for, but in PvE, this really starts to shine because there aren't as many PvP focused things. There's a lot more PvP specializations than PvE, so this one slots very nicely into this build. This gives you just flat base attack damage. On that same note, up here, the top red one, this is kind of a sleeper right here. Increase your attack by 20% for 6 seconds when using a sword class skill for 12 seconds. You have one sword class skill on the rotation, and it has, if you have good CDR, 14-second cooldown. So every time you use the sword, you're just a plus 20% skill, and it lines up with the cooldown. I recommend right after you use the sword skill and trigger this to hit Dark Child and then start going off, because that's when your big damage boost starts to happen. It kind of gives you, if you're familiar with World of Warcraft and other games like that, that's your damage window. That's your burst window. That's, okay, my rotation, and now it's time to go off. Next, we have this one right here, cooldown. This is a debated one right now. You can get cooldown in other locations. If you're struggling for cooldown, this is a great one. If you're not struggling for cooldown, we have another option right here. Increase the attack, defense, and HP of your subordinates by 30%. This will be your imps in this build. Your imps hit like a truck. They'll do 30%. It's scaling, so it'll be, instead of 16%, it'll be a little over 20% damage per hit, which is a lot because they last a while. It also gives them some survivability, so they can last a little bit longer doing more damage. Now, I did that in kind of a weird order. That was your 3rd slot. As your 4th slot, we have up here this yellow one. do 25% more damage to targets under 50% HP. Against the boss modes like Kingtron or things like that, this will be great. It really helps you work up your numbers, especially this also has some fringe uses in PvP if people have a lot of defense and such. This is a brawly style one as well, but this really helps you secure the kill. This can also be really great in Dark Dimension because those bosses they increase their HP. Well, they actually lowered their bars but increased their defense and such. This can really help you slice through them like butter. Now let's jump into companions. For companions, we're in a pretty interesting situation. Because we're doing PvE and so many of these summons are made for PvP, we don't really have a lot to go off of. I think the best one is Thena, because if we look at her skill, she does damage when she releases and gives a attack boost to yourself and allies. So this has uses in other game modes, so you'll never feel bad about investing into Thena. Thena giving you that attack boost lets you really ramp up the damage, especially with the Darkchild or other attack bonuses, things like that. This goes really well into your damage mode. What I like best about Thena is Thena has a short summoning animation, so does your ultimate. So when you hit your ultimate, you want to also be tapping on Thena. You want to be using them both at the same time. Best case scenario, right after a sword skill. So you can also have that 20% attack boost and your scaling gets monstrous. This is how you cut through people like butter. Now, if you don't have a big Thena, what you can do is a Donna Ports. Donna Ports has the same exact ability minus the initial damage. She has a shorter summon animation, so that could actually work to your benefit, because you can probably get a 6-star Donna Ports before you can get a 4 or 5-star Thena. So this is your budget option, your budget Thena. That's what I call her, a budget Thena. But it really can encapsulate what you're trying to do. Last but not least, let's get into the Omega cards. Now with Omega cards, these are not the cards that I suggest. I'm more of a PvP style player. But if we look at the card sets, what I do really like is if we look down here, Tony Stark, depending on the game mode, the Horde style. Some game modes, villain damage can reign supreme, but what the difference is between villain and supervillain is villain is anything with 1 health bar, supervillain is 4 or more. So depending on the game mode, Tony Stark can be a good card. Really you're going to be leaning towards 2 card sets, and the first one is set 7, and that's because right here you have the Wolf that gives supervillain damage, a whopping 14.4%, and the 2-set bonus is also supervillain damage. You want to team that up with, you can do supervillain damage decrease if you have a hard time with some of these game modes, but if you're just trying to maximize damage, What If Thor attack would be the best thing to mix it with. So you'll have attack, supervillain, and supervillain, which is a nasty combo for these game modes. Last would be set 10, which is a 2-set attack bonus, which is also something you can mess with. But you're going to look for West Coast Avengers villain damage, because no matter the game mode, there's going to be villains. This is not going to be bad for you. But I would prefer to go for Avengers World number 10 supervillain damage and Avengers 202 crit damage. So you're boosting your crit damage, more attack, and more supervillain damage. Really trying to cap those numbers out. You can't... and then really, the things that you can look at if you're just trying to fill some slots at that point is... Strange is ridiculously good on her because she really needs that cooldown, as well as if you don't have specials, you can go with something like Maestro, for the ultimate gauge recovery and 2-set attack, and fix that out with Captain America 26 crit rate. Now, the only thing we didn't go over here is potential, and that's because the idea is you're supposed to be maxing out all of your potential, right? You're going to eventually get it all. But what you're going to really want to do is first you want to max out attack right here. You also want to max out HP because the potential per stat is way more as you go, starting from the top as you go down. You get way more health by maxing this out than any other stat of these. Then Defense Pierce works on some bosses, but not every boss. This really depends on the boss you're trying to go to, as well as HP. Remember, HP equals damage to a degree. It's only 3%, but the amount of HP you get per thing used, even if it's only 3%, is roughly the same, if not more, than other things in the game, especially when you count the HP as an effective stat. Next, going down, you're not really going to worry about accuracy rate for bosses, but the stamina recovery and HP are amazing. You're going to want those. Total damage is actually one of the best stats in the game. We don't know the exact equation for their damage, but total damage is always the last thing that happens, it appears. And it has... so you have 3 classification of stats. You have... ones that give the smallest bonus, that would be your total damage. Ones that give the, normal size bonus, which will be like ultimate gauge recovery, defense pierce, things like that. And ones that give the most, that would be your HP and such. You can just see, looking by the numbers you get, if you look just on the board right here, 0.21, 0.41, and 4,000, one of these things isn't like the other, right? So you're actually going to want all 3 of this last perk right here. Let me know in the comment section down below if you think I missed anything, and I'll be getting back to you guys as soon as possible about the Omega War and Dimension Duel builds. Till next time, guys.